Good morning. Welcome to webinar. The title of today's webinar is Enterprise Search with Generative AI. I'm Morten Forfang. I'm a director at Computas, and I preside over cloud technology and artificial intelligence. I also have a PhD in artificial intelligence. Let's have a little look at what we're going to talk about today. It's going to be sort of an extended half an hour, roughly, I'm thinking. So we'll sort of start with talking about Google's AI offering in sort of broad terms. The Google Cloud is obviously a large and mature offering, and in there you sort of have a slice which is sort of artificial intelligence. So we'll sort of have a look at that, and we'll ever so slightly compare it with Azure's offering as well, just to sort of give you sort of a flavor and how that sort of pans out. And then we'll sort of move into the main matter today, how to utilize that AI offering, and particularly generative AI offering, to make applications. So we'll spend some time on looking at how to do that in practice. I'll be sort of making an application, and we'll sort of be focusing on enterprise search as the particular application we'll look at. And then, having done that, we'll move from there to what could possibly go wrong, or what do you need to think about. So we'll sort of cover some of the aspects that might be worthwhile considering when you're building an application like this, and some of it will then be catered for by those tools we've gone through, and some of it might not. And we'll round off with some questions and answers. It is such that there is a, you have a message, you can sort of send messages. Please ask questions there. I don't have that part of the screen up here, such that I'll sort of have a look at those questions at the very end in the Q&A session. Remind me if I forget. And you're generally welcome to ask questions if you want to. But as I say, we'll at least try to have a Q&A session at the end, if there aren't any questions at all. So with that in mind, I think we'll just start from the top, basically. So let's start with what is Google's AI offering? Many ways to look at this. If you think about, or if you consider AI to be a part of a puzzle where you go from raw data, the data you have, and to something that is of value to you. Might be increased sales, might be better, more happy end users. It might be all kinds of business goals if you want to. Then artificial intelligence and machine learning and generative AI can play a part in getting insight from your data. So that sort of is a essential middle part of that journey, if you want to. So on this illustration here, you sort of start on the left side, and you start with your data, and you sort of try to assemble it, make it into quality data, maybe enhance it, and then you store it somewhere. So that would be sort of, for example, BigQuery, Google's offering on data warehouses. And when you've stored it somewhere, then you can use artificial intelligence tools to try to gain insight into those data, and that insight then you can sort of use consuming that insight in various ways. It could be that you provide it as a service and stitch it together with all the parts of a solution you might have, or some infrastructure you might have, or it might be reports and business intelligence things, for example. So that's sort of generally the the flow from data through insight and into something that has value for your organization. And Google provides a broad range of products, of which this is a really tiny slice, the products that are exemplified under the various columns in this illustration. But at least it gives you some kind of flavor. This setup is very similar to what you find with the other tech titans AI platforms as well. If we then sort of focus on the star of the show, if you want to, Vertex AI, that would be sort of the cloud platform part, which caters for artificial intelligence, machine learning, things like that. And we'll have a bit closer look at how that is stacked together before we sort of move on to the more practical aspects when we've sort of covered how it all fits into the broader landscape, if you want to. So Vertex AI, you might think of that as a kind of sort of storied buildings with various floors, if you want to. So you would have sort of lower floors where you cater for things that actually sort of runs and stays in production and doesn't fall apart and things like that. And there would be lower floors where you employ skills, specific machine learning and data science and data engineering skills. And then at the higher floors, there would be more tailored products that require less competence, less programming skills, and where you sort of just provide data and you might sort of tweak some parameters, and then you sort of get insight and results from that, right? And it also matters then on sort of how your setup is, what you want to achieve, how your competence profile is, whether you sort of run these things yourself, things like that. But in general, sort of everything from sort of low code, no programming competence to sort of hardcore tools where you have full freedom but no safety belts if you want to, and then sort of the infrastructural layer where it all sort of comes together and then sort of runs in production, and we can monitor things and sort of serve your customers or serve your clients, I guess. So that's sort of generally how Vertex AI is stitched together. And I'm thinking then that now that you have sort of gotten a view of how both the Google Cloud AI offering looks and how Vertex AI in general looks, then perhaps we should leave the fileware and have a look at how it actually looks when you work with these things. If you, there are two ways to approach the services and the tools that the Google Cloud AI platform provides, and that would be the same with the other Tech Titans platforms as well. You could either, as this screenshot exemplifies, you could be doing point and click, you can be in a graphical user interface, and you can sort of choose tools in the Vertex AI catalog on the left side there. You can sort of work with models, you can work with your data, you can have a studio where you can put these things together. And then on the left side there, you have this URL which you can punch in yourself and try yourself. And this is generally where you start getting familiar with how to do things in practice when you're going to build AI applications on the Google Cloud Platform. And then as you get more experience with that, and where the professionals are, that is usually then in a kind of sort of a perpendicular world where there is a programming interface, the API part, and where you sort of programmatically do the same things as you did on the previous screenshot in a graphical user interface. So in the graphical user interface, you might say, I want to look at that model, I want to train something there, and you can also programmatically do that. And incidentally, that sort of brings us to maybe the next topic. How does that compare with, how does this platform compare with, for example, Azure's offering? And one of the things that our engineers like quite much when it comes to the Google Cloud and the Google Cloud's machine learning and artificial intelligence offering is that Google is very much an API first kind of offering. They build everything with APIs, and the console, the point and click, sort of comes as a second stage. And that isn't to say that the console is inferior, it's just that it's a mindset, if you want to. And not all the other large AI platforms and cloud platforms out there do necessarily have that kind of priority. It comes with some pros and cons, but for those who are in the professional part and who are sort of going to employ programmers interfaces, it's a feature that is well liked with Google Cloud. If we move over to how that looks in Azure, it's very similar. If you go to start with Azure as such, Azure will have a machine learning studio, and it will have functionality, the sort of tabs and the menus on the left side there, that are functionally very similar to what you found in Vertex AI on the Google side. And Azure would also, in these more later or more recently, it will also have a very tight collaboration with OpenAI. So they would have a particular Azure OpenAI Studio, and where generative AI and large language models will be sort of in a prominent place, if you want to. That is also structurally and with respect to the offering very similar to what Google also provides. In fact, on this very abstract level, these offerings are very similar. They're structured very similarly, and there should really be no surprise in that. Computas is a solution house where our engineers, we are sort of working with all these platforms. We're not in the pockets, so to speak, of one of these vendors. And we experience that, when Google comes up with some kind of new invention, and Azure or AWS will come along in a couple of weeks and they build the same, and vice versa. When Azure does something that is smart and seems to sort of have some traction, then Google or AWS or Oracle will come along and offer very similar things. They sort of neck and neck all the time. And right now, January 2024, the offering on AI and generative AI are both in quality and in breadth and maturity of services on this level quite similar. So with this, we have gone through the general offering, the AI offering of Google Cloud. And I was then thinking of spending a bit more time on transforming, taking all that material which we looked at now, and try to see, okay, fine, how can we make a generative AI, an enterprise search, as an example, application, and what does it take to do that? What are the choices we have? And we might be talking a little bit about also what are the pros and cons about that. But first and foremost, just a practical introduction on how to do it, basically. So I will, if you remember that Vertex AI story building I talked about, we'll start very much on the top where things are sort of Google does most of the heavy lifting, and we'll just provide some data, we'll click some buttons and sort of get something that is running, at least as a prototype. And then afterwards, we'll talk a little bit about, okay, that's fine, but maybe I wanted something else. That's fine. Then we'll move 1 or 2 floors down in that Vertex AI building to something that is less with safety belts and more with flexibility, just to sort of get a flavor for how that looks. And then I'll leave this full screen view, and I'll try to show you this screenshot, but just live, and see how that works. So bear with me. I'll do like this, and I'll go here. So this is, if it is such that you don't see that I've switched now from the presentation to a Google Cloud Console, then somebody has to talk to me over the microphone, and I'll see where the problem lies. But hopefully you now see the console instead. So let's just orient ourselves somewhat. First of all, I mean, as you saw from a previous slide, this is just a URL you punch in, right? console.cloud.google.com. And there you are, you're in. There might be issues with respect to your particular user, as in, does Google know who you are? So there might be some configuration and setup and sign up there. But in general, after having signed up in some way, then you're into this console like this. Again, exceedingly similar on this level, if you want to how Azure, for example, organizes it. I am in a project. So this is kind of sort of a demo project, if you want to, where I can do things like this, a webinar. And we have here kind of a product catalog that is a very short, abbreviated catalog. Here it's quite a bit longer. And we'll find here, for example, Vertex AI, right? And exactly as it was with the Azure offering as well, part of it is part of the Vertex AI, and then they sort of separated out certain groupings of services that pertain to generative AI, and that they've called search and conversation. And here we can make search and conversation applications based on generative AI. And as we're in the console, we'll do the point and click thing. So we go new app here, and you can see that there are apps, there are data stores. So you get a sort of an app that is, the search application, for example, but it needs to search on some data. So that's where you do the data. And then there are, when you got it in production, when you got it running, and you want to know how it goes, do analytics with it, things like that. See that it isn't down, things like that. So we'll be in the apps part here, and we'll just do new app, basically. So, and this screen illustrates this particular point, that is, we're fairly high up in that Vertex AI story building, where we're sort of very much in just like in provide data, do some clicks, and I'll do the rest for you in the managed way of modern clouds, with the limitations, but also the advantages. One of the main ones being really, really quickly up and running. And we can select an app type. We can select either, no, I want a search application. Okay, so there you get results back. You type in your questions. So that's the natural language part, the large language model, the generative AI part of that thing, and you get results back. Or you can say, no, I want a chat application. So then, what's the difference really? In search, you can do search and you can do follow-up questions. So isn't that kind of a chat? Yes, but chats frequently have kind of sort of an aim. It wants to achieve something. You sort of you write about that. I'm confused. My Wi-Fi doesn't work. Can you help me? And then that sort of might entail some kind of process, or it understands your intent, as they say. It understands what you want to do. So you want to achieve a particular kind of task, right? So that would be the chat. And then you can also choose recommendations. And recommendations would generally be sort of, what you see when you shop around on the web platforms. Other customers have bought this when you looked at this, or can you recommend in this large collection of documents, can you recommend a document that is similar to this document, for example? So that would be recommendations. Today, we'll then try to do the search. So we'll select the search. And then, as I said, we're now on step 2, and we sort of have some very simple buttons to choose from. Do we want the application to do extractions where you sort of get quotes from the underlying sources? Yeah, why not? Sure. And some multimedia things like that. Do you want the large language model to do summarizations and generally sort of try to chew upon the material and gives you sort of an abbreviated version? Yeah, great. We'll do that as well. And then you give it a name. So today, I'm MFO, and today's webinar is sort of on 24/01/22. Is that how far we got? We're in 23 today. 23 webinar. And my company name, so that would be Computas. And I have some choices with respect to where my data is supposed to be stored and processed. And for GDPR purposes, for example, that would be a convenient thing to choose from. We'll just leave it at the defaults here. Right. And then it says, okay, fine. I've sort of understood how you want the application, and how is it with data? So I need to get the data from somewhere. That's fine. So in the same fashion, we create a new data store, and we get the choices between, you can screen scrape a website and sort of do questions on websites. And that is something that many of our clients are interested in. Can we have a kind of sort of a search service with natural language on our own web pages, for example? Or you could have that BigQuery thing I mentioned, as in that storage place, that data warehouse. Or we could do general storage in the cloud. Or we can sort of fall back on a more requires more work in the sense an API, a programmer's interface, where you, for example, could have plugins for third-party content vendors, things like that, or generally have a programmatic solution if you want to. So we'll choose the cloud storage. And here we can then choose sort of various forms of data and formats. Now it is such that I want to do my demonstration on private data. I don't want to do it on public data. The enterprise searchy part is part of the aim here, is to show how can I do search or chat for that matter, if we chose that, on our own data, our own private data, right? So what kind of data can I demonstrate that are private? And what I did essentially was that I went to Bard, which is kind of ChatGPT, just in Google's clothing. Bard is just a public website, and asked it, can you create a story for me? In this case, in English, which has to do with the car that breaks down and some people. It looks like this. On a warm summer afternoon, the young couple, Lucius and Octavia, found themselves stranded on the side of a quiet country road, etc., etc. So it's just a story, just some prose. And I'll use that as an example of our private data, because at least we can be sure that this doesn't exist somewhere else, right? Okay. So that was wrong. So I choose a file, and I find that in a bucket, a kind of a cloud storage place. I've have that file in and sort of choose that. And I need to punch in the name for that as well. So we can sort of do 240123 data store, for example. And then it gobbles up that and prepares a data store with that very little, very, very small database, I guess. And we can then choose that here. And I can say, go away. We can say create. And then it sort of starts creating that. Now it sort of requires a minute or two, essentially, on chewing upon all these parts, because now we've provided with all these data and configurations, and then it sort of creates that. And I'm not going to wait around for 2 minutes or 3 minutes or whatever it is. Such that I have, because I've done this before, I have search, the car story here, which is essentially the same data from that Bard file. It's just that here the application is sort of up and running if you want to. When we would have waited for those 3 minutes, then we would have gotten to a stage where we consider data. That's what we've done now. And we preview the solution, and then you can do some further configurations with respect to how you want the chat to behave and things like that. And then you get instructions on how to sort of stitch that together in a website or put it in production, things like that. And then there will be some functionality with respect to getting analytics out of it. You know, how did that go? And here we can, did you remember the story? So like in, for example, who is Octavia? That was one of the characters in the story, right? Choose a little bit upon that. And it tells me that, lo and behold, Octavia is a social worker, because as you see here, the quote is Octavia is a social worker with a heart of gold. Things like that, right? So that's sort of generally a preview. And then through either working with the data or working with the configurations, you might tweak this to fit your purposes. So here you can sort of see how you go very rapidly from just having some data and then getting to a point where you are fairly close to a prototype of a search application, in this case, where you can search with natural language on that data you provided. So that wraps up and hopefully gives you a bit of a flavor of how this works, how practically you go about it, and hopefully gives you inspiration to, yeah, hang on, that wasn't too hard. I could try that myself. We could try it on our company data and see how that works. Maybe it's good, maybe it isn't. I'll sort of go back to the presentation now and talk a little bit more about the other alternatives we had. So with many of our clients, that's great. Enterprise search is marvelous. Yeah, we could do it that way. But the needs are many, and the particular tweaks that the company or an organization might have are many as well. So that, for example, many of our clients have employees that sit and receive emails and phones that are inquiries, that are, again, prose, natural language things, and then you want to transform that into something. You extract information about who is talking to us, what do they want, things like that, and you punch that into some kind of backend system where there are like in forms and structure. So you want to sort of use generative AI for extracting information from natural language. In that sense, very similar to what you did in the enterprise search, very similar to what you would do in a search, in a chat, but where the needs are a bit different. You want to sort of extract that information and you want to punch that in, automate that process where some employees are spending a lot of time trying to do that every day, right? So how would you, for example, go about that? Then you could go to the language tab in the Vertex AI and work. Then we're sort of moving ever so slightly down that story in the Vertex AI building, and we're sort of giving ourselves a bit more freedom, and it requires a bit more competence, but you also then are able to cater for a bit more specific needs if you want to. So for example, you could tell the AI that, look, I want you to look at incoming emails and I want you to extract certain types of information. An email might look like, for example, like this, from somebody. Let's say this is IT support. Hi, my PC just died. It worked yesterday. Now nothing happens when I press the power button. The PC's here at the office E412. Can you help me, please? So they get like in 200 like that every day, and they got quite some employees working on that. It would be great if you could automate part of that, and maybe the employees could just do validation work instead of actually reading all those emails and extracting that particular information. And it all transpires that the same technology, the same large language models, the same generative AI that was used for search, as we saw, is also eminently placed for extracting information like this, putting on a structured form, and then you might say, yeah, okay, great, fine. So it has now produced text where it's a bit more structured. So what? Well, both this platform and other platforms will then provide you with source code, which you can sort of stitch together. But here you need some kind of developer experience, and you can sort of extract all that information and punch it into that backend system, or punch it into some system which shows those employees, is this okay? Just press the button and say okay, kind of thing. So that's an example of where you want to move one floor down and not necessarily use those predefined products that come with the platform, because your needs are a bit different, right? So that's sort of the idea here, is to give you a flavor for both. How can I get going really quickly with those standardized products that Google or Azure have thought out on beforehand? But also, if I have special needs and want it slightly different, what do you do then? And that quite naturally brings us over to the last topic today, which has to do with what do you need to sort of consider, think about? What are the things that might go wrong? And they are in a couple of groupings, at least in my experience. Let's just start with maturity, in the sense that with generative AI, as you all know, ChatGPT made its debut into the world some 13, 14 months ago, and that was a bit of a game changer. But that also means that all that technology that is now very much in vogue, very much mainstream, and which has to do with generative AI and language models and natural language, is a very fast-moving landscape. And that means that the offerings from both Google and the other tech titans are influenced by that, right? Many of the products are such that they change quite rapidly. And an example in point there was that when I showed you those screenshots from the Azure portfolio, we had an Azure Machine Learning Studio, and then we had an Azure Open AI Studio, and that's kind of sort of an add-on or a twist or a product within the product, if you want to, that comes about because there is change, there is rapid change in the field, right? And I didn't show you that, but if you took that Azure Machine Learning Studio, you could also find the Azure Machine Learning Studio Classic, which was kind of the previous edition before that. And again, this pertains to all the Tech Titan platforms, and would pertain to whatever you made yourself as well. You need to think about how to insulate yourself from this risk, essentially, that whatever you build it on now, it's great, it works, and 2 years down the lane, it might be that things have changed so much that either the product, the platform that you built upon is kind of at the end of its lifetime, and here is the migration guide, and please migrate to the next version, whatever, right? Or in some other way has changed such that you need to keep track of it. And it's the nature of things when something is really hot and everybody wants it, but there is quite some rapid development underneath at the same time. You need some kind of way of dealing with that. And there are professional ways of ensuring yourself that way. So that's something to consider. More generally, it is such that in AI projects, if you want to, there are quite a little list that are sort of kind of a mix between what are the things that you need to consider when you're building IT solutions in general? What are the things that you need to consider when you're dealing with data that might be critical, personal information that has some aspects that has to do with regulatory things, and there is this aspect that has to do with AI in particular that, for example, has to do with ethics, discrimination, things like that. So this is kind of sort of a mix of all those, if you want to. I'll, just for the sake of it, I guess, focus on a couple of these. First, one of the things that come again and again when it comes to AI projects in general, and when generative AI projects in particular, is this thing about like you need data. And as many of you probably know, in an AI project, most of the time is not really used on AI. It's used on data. It's used on fixing your data, getting your data in good shape, things like that. But if we zoom in a little bit, that was our Octavia as a social worker application that we kind of built as a prototype 4 minutes ago. What if that source you have is not a file as I showed you, and it's maybe not even something that was in that menu where you could choose between various types of sources, right? What if it's something, an ERP system or a CRM system or some kind of financial applications or something that you are using and which is critical to your business, but which this large tech giant never thought about, right? How do you deal with that? So what about unsupported sources? What if you want to stitch that GUI into something that is weird and different, right? What if when you make your search, the agent really needs to collect, aggregate, do something with the data before it's presented? So you need some kind of backend service to be calling. What if the model you're using it would be great if it was a model that was specialized towards health, right? Or if you press that thumbs up button, right? And this goes well, what happens then? What if you want better control, more automated improvement control, such that if you say, yeah, that was a really good choice, then those kind of search results come up more frequently, etc., etc. How do you deal with that? So I'll show you ever so quickly a really small demo about that as well. So here, I hope you now see that I've switched to a different application. And here, it's kind of the same thing. We have an enterprise search again. Now it's in Norwegian, incidentally. If we built that previous edition we had, from the sort of top of the Vertex AI story with everything sort of easily done. That could also cater for Norwegian, but nevertheless. What if you want your search to be pulling information from such a source in real time? How do you do that? Well, the underlying technology going 2 floors down on that building, and it's with developer experience, it's something that you roughly do before lunch, is to pull together those components, the search component, the large language model component, and stitch that together to kind of a solution that you can also deploy. So it's not that magic to do it yourself. And there you sort of, might ask questions, and my apologies to those in your audience who don't read or talk Norwegian, but here, like you ask questions about a source, and the source we've used for this particular example is just a source that sort of is about regulatory things with respect to how to deal with your employees, given by law, basically. So we sort of made a private data store for that. It's something that you can get publicly, but many companies tweak that and add their own rules and things like that. So that's a private data you might have, but it's in Confluence, it's in Atlassian, it's in a third-party storage place, right? So you want something that sort of pulls that information from, for example, Atlassian. Could have been all kinds of other sources. And then we do the natural language chat on that instead. So how many vacation days do I have during a year, for example? And we'll chew upon that in the same sense. Now it sort of asks Confluence, okay, what about vacation days, right? And then after it has done that, then it sort of applies the large language model under the hood, exactly the same thing as we had in that previous demo, but where that was just a predefined template, a product template that comes from Google. So you get quicker up and running, but you might also have challenges if you want to sort of customize it in certain ways or things like that, right? So that's sort of the general difference, I guess. It did take some time, didn't it? Last. Marvelous. Well, maybe the demo spøkelse, as we say in Norwegian, really kicked in. Doesn't look like it's sort of oh well, anyway, so those are the pitfalls of sort of going 2 floors down, right? Because then you have to maintain and develop the solution yourself, and this was an excellent illustration of where that might fail then. So those are the risks, right? You get some benefits, but you also get some risks. Oh well, that's fine. Let's wrap this up. Going back to the presentation, I can see that we are roughly on time here. There are a couple of other things that the last thing I'm going to mention is that with AI, there are particular concerns with respect to ethical behavior, and also, of course, all those things that apply to all information storage systems that has to do with personal information, things like that. You need to have a grip on that if you're going to use this in production. And when it comes to generative AI in particular, then there are sort of, it can hallucinate, it can produce information that sort of wasn't really there. It can obviously create all kinds of other inappropriate responses if you want to. And there are methods and methodologies how you work through such a system, such that you safeguard that whatever comes out of a search or a chat is in fact appropriate and okay. And all the big players are doing this very professionally and working on that all the time. And if you want to do things like this yourself, then you also need to think about these things and have sort of control over that, I guess. Oh well, I guess that sort of wraps it up, really. My email address is sort of on the lower half on this page. Please keep in touch if there are any questions or something you want to sort of follow up on. And apart from that, I'll now try to sort of delve into that message log in case there is anything there. And if there are any questions,